All right, in this video, I'm gonna give you an exercise that you can do that will make you better at portrait painting, and you don't even need paint or a canvas to do it. Okay, if you're new to the channel, then welcome to Paint Coach. My name is Chris Fornatero, and I'm here to help simplify painting so that you can get better faster. All right, so the way this exercise goes is that you just need to find a photo of a face. This could be in a newspaper, this could be in a book, a magazine, print it out. Doesn't matter. It can be in color or black and white. What you're going to do is you're going to look at the face and analyze it and try to break the face down into two categories, light and shadow. Then you're going to take a pen or a marker and you're going to shade in the shadow shapes that you identified. Now, squinting your eyes is going to help you see these shadow shapes, but when you're doing this, try to make the shapes as simple as possible or connecting as many shapes as you can. The fewer shapes and the bigger shapes, the better. And don't get tripped up on things like hair and clothing. You need to group those into either light or shadow as well. All right, now if you actually want to get this printable sheet of some faces that I put together, 6 of them, along with the answer sheet, I'll have a link to where you can get these in the description of this video. Now, I actually first saw this exercise in Kevin McPherson's book, Fill Your Oil Paintings with Light and Color. In the book, he shows how this process of breaking the subject down into light and shadow is helpful with any subject that you do. I know no matter the subject, I always do this whenever I'm painting a still life, especially something that's complex like flowers maybe. I'll try and break it down into just light and shadow. Same thing goes for a landscape. In fact, when I'm plein air painting, this is one of the first things I like to do because you're painting from life when you're painting in plein air and the light is constantly moving. So I want to lock down my scene and lock down my shadow shape. So I actually try and see the scene in just light and shadow and lock that in soon. But let's get back to portraits. So how is this going to help your portrait painting? By making this simple distinction of light and shadow, it's going to help you organize the face and keep you on track as you find more subtle shifts in value. Portraits can get very tricky, especially when you try and zero in and focus on very subtle color shifts very early on in the process. Like this portrait of Tony Soprano, for example. It might be pretty intimidating to see all this green reflected light up into his face from the pool, and that might seem like hard to paint. But if you first just think of light and shadow, and you just block his face out with shadow shapes and light shapes, it's gonna make things a lot easier because when you go in to paint that reflected light, you know that even though it is technically light, it's operating in the shadowed side and it can only be so bright. One of the most common problems that I see with student portraits is that their light and shadow patterns don't make sense, meaning that they let subtle shifts in value most of the time within the shadow shapes get too bright to where they stop reading as in the shadows. And if they would have mapped out the light and shadows first, it would have helped keep them on track as they added in those subtle shifts in value. This is what I do with all my portraits. I first draw out these simple shadow shapes with thin paint and actually block them out. And the fact that these big simple shapes makes it a lot more simple to draw. Even when I first introduce color to my portraits, I'm still operating in just light and shadow. Now let's walk through some examples of these light and shadow patterns. For this one, the light and shadow is pretty evenly split, which I personally find to be the easiest to paint, because I feel like just getting these shapes, the face is kind of already there. This is another thing that doing this is going to help you with. It's going to help you in choosing references to paint. If you're looking at a reference of a face and you're like, should I paint this or not? See if you can easily identify the light and the shadow. If it's difficult for you to do that because the face is maybe very evenly lit or there aren't really many shadows there, that might not be the best photo to paint. Doesn't mean that you can't paint it or that someone couldn't make it work. It just means it might be more of a challenge for you. This is why when I was doing portrait commissions, I would always have the client send me a bunch of possible photos for the painting because this is one of the things that I would look for. All right, now with this example, the face is mostly light. The only shadow is really in the eye sockets here. So when I started to paint this, I was very aware that for most of the painting, I was going to be operating in the light. Now this one is the opposite. It's mostly in the shadows. So when it came time to paint this, I wasn't scared to block out all of this in shadow. I wasn't worried about losing detail in the eyes or, you know, the nose. I first just wanted to block out light and shadow. I know this might seem scary, but you just have to trust the process. And when I'm putting in these shadows, I'm using paint that is thin, but not transparent. Now I'm not using any medium, I'm just using paint and paint thinner here. This is gonna allow me to build on top of this if I want to. And whenever I did find lighter values in the shadows of this portrait, I made sure that even though they were lighter, they weren't too light and they were still operating and reading as in the shadows. Now, like I said before, this exercise is helpful no matter the subject. So even if you're doing a pet portrait, I highly recommend this. It's especially important, I feel like, with pet portraits because a lot of times pets can have different color fur. And when you're shifting colors, but still trying to keep it in a certain value to read as in the shadows, it's very important to first block it out simply. Figure out what's the light side and what's the shadow side. If you get that, it's going to make putting in that different colored fur a lot easier. Now, I brought this up earlier, but it's really important that you really just think in terms of light and shadow, no matter what is happening in the subject. Like this one, a lot of students would get caught up in his beard because they think, oh, like that's hair and it's not skin, it's different. I gotta do something different. Yeah, the color might be different, but the value is probably not gonna be that much different. When I blocked this out, I was still thinking just light and shadow, no matter if I was painting the skin, the beard, or the hair on his head, or his clothing. You know, I really wanted to identify that first so that when I did put in subtle changes, I had something to keep me on track and to keep my light and shadow pattern reading. So if you got a portrait coming up that you're doing, try this with the reference photo first, or find a magazine, newspaper, or something and try this. If you want to make things super convenient, again, you can download this one with 6 little practice ones along with the answer key, I guess you could call it, by clicking the link in the description below. All right, hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel. If you want to see what I'm painting on a daily basis, you can follow me on Instagram at Forza43. I'm Chris Fornatero, here telling you to go get painting.